This past weekend, my wife and I took our Tesla Model 3 on a road trip to New York City. At approximately 420 miles round trip, this will be the first trip we've taken that will require charging stops along the way. So, given that this is a very different experience in taking an electric vehicle on a trip of this length versus an ICE vehicle, I wanted to share this with all of you so you can see, from my perspective, what traveling with an EV is truly like. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Max, and today I'm going to take you with us on our first real road trip with the Tesla Model 3. Before I do start, if you do like the content I've been posting, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way with supporting the channel and ensures that I'm able to continue to make content like you're watching today out in the future. And with that, let's rewind about a week ago and get into the trip and what it was like. So we're about ready to go on our trip. We have 4 hours from Maryland to New York City. I charged the car up to 95% last night, and then this morning I have set the charge up again to kind of top it off, get close to 100% before we hit the road, because you really don't want the battery sitting at 100%. I did use the trip planner that is a part of the holiday update, where you can actually set your entire trip up in the Tesla app and then send it to the car. You're actually able to set what charge you plan on leaving with, so it doesn't default to just having whatever the car is currently at when you're setting the trip up the night before. So once I get in the car, I'm gonna be setting the trip up so that we arrive with more like 40% charge, so we can get completely out of New York City and charge on the Jersey Turnpike on the way home. So when I ended up planning this trip, I wasn't actually able to modify the target charge destination with the Tesla app directly, but it was fairly easy to add a stop to our trip for a supercharger along the way. From there, I knew I could charge the car until I was comfortable with the final destination arrival charge. Cool thing that I noticed as I was driving is that when you start to get close to your supercharger start, you get notified that the battery is actually being preconditioned live, which was great to see. So at our one supercharger stop, we've been driving somewhere between 2.5 to 3 hours. So I'll plug it in now and see how long that's gonna take. So it looked like it would take a half an hour to get us from 26% to 80 on the supercharger, so really not too bad. All right, so the car's still charging right now. Originally, I was only gonna charge it to about 60%, which would have been plenty to get us there and still have 40-ish% left for the car to sit over the weekend. But we spent 10 minutes in the Wawa getting a couple drinks, using the restroom, that kind of thing. And by the time we were out, there was less than 20 minutes left. My wife had to take a work call, so now that that's wrapping up, we're down to about 8 minutes remaining, if not less. I'm one of 2 cars now charging on this one. The other person is 2 spots away from me. We did have 2 separate instances of a non-EV vehicle using these spots, which I know is supposed to be a big no-no, so that was interesting, but at least they were in and out quickly. It's not like there were no other spots for me to pull into, so that was at least good. Just a little bit odd since there were tons of other spots that were not supercharger spots that they could have used, but we're gonna hit the road soon, and I'll keep you posted on how it's going. And you can see as this is filling up, it's slowly increasing the amount of charge I'll have once we get to the hotel in New York City. We got about 46 minutes remaining, and right now it looks like we'd have 60% charge when we get there with 73% battery. I'm just gonna let it run the 6 more minutes to get it up to the full 80. And as always, if I wanted to, while I'm waiting here, and if I hadn't been doing stuff or been on call the entire time that this was charging, I could have gone into the theater app and watched a number of shows while I was sitting here waiting. I can even watch my own content. It's gonna line up. Pretty cool. But to be honest. All right, we just hit 80%, so we are good to go. Well, we made it to the hotel. We're in line to valet the car. So I'll check back in at the end of the weekend when we're picking up the car and take you through that trip back to see how all that goes as well. So stay tuned again. So we're at the end of our trip. We're leaving the city, and what's different with leaving now versus when we headed out this way is the fact that we left with full charge, whereas now we have about 52% battery, so I don't actually have to manually add the charge stop. It is gonna force us to stop and charge the car. And right now with our stopping about 15 minutes somewhere in Jersey, after the first hour and a half of the drive, we'll be able to charge for 15 minutes and then get home with about 10% battery. So yeah, keep you posted on how all that goes. So coming back, because we needed to charge to reach our home destination, I didn't actually have to add a manual stop this time. The Tesla navigation did that for us, which was incredibly nice. Again, this was a breeze, and even with a 20-ish minute charge time, we ate up almost half the time just using the restrooms at the rest stop and grabbing some coffee while we waited. The last 10 or so minutes we spent watching some stand-up, so really not a bad way to spend time at all. And with that, we were back on our way. And now I'm sitting here a week removed from that trip, and I've got some ideas and retrospectives that I'd like to share about what it was like traveling with an EV for a trip of this length versus traveling with a standard gas car. So the first thing I want to talk about is charge time and how that actually impacts your trip duration, because my biggest concern was if you have to plug in for 20 to 45 minutes, that's a significant time matter versus getting gas. For doing this on a road trip where you're hitting rest stops, it actually didn't feel like a whole lot of extra time. First of all, both of my charges only recommended anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes to get back on the road, and any extra time was a choice I made based on what I was comfortable with for arrival charge. But say I was driving a gas car, typically my process for hitting a rest stop would be you pull into the parking lot, you get out of the car, you use the restroom, you get lunch, you get food, you get whatever, and your car's just sitting in park while that's going on. Then you move on to getting gas, and most of the time, at least in my experience, there's a line to get gas, so even if the fill up itself is only going to take a couple minutes, you might be sitting there for 5 to 10 minutes to get your turn in line. So altogether, that's still about 25 minutes of wait time. Whereas with the Tesla, I was able to pull directly into a spot. There was no wait at either of the stops that I ended up using, plug in, and do all those things that I would have had to do sequentially for the gas car at the same time. I was able to get food, use the bathroom, get coffee, all while the car was charging, which is different than if I was getting gas. So obviously if you're in a circumstance where you're not hitting the rest stop and there is no line at the gas pump, it's gonna be faster to hit that gas pump and go than it is to charge for 25 minutes. But if you're on a road trip and you've been driving for 20, 30 minutes, chances are you're getting out of the car to do something. And that really cuts down on the actual experienced delta time when you're charging the Tesla versus using a gas pump for an ICE car. Now, the major caveat with this is the fact that with Tesla, you do shorter stops more frequently versus a gas car where you're probably gonna stop maybe half the time for your destination because you'll fill up and then move on. Because of the way Tesla batteries are designed, it's actually faster to do shorter sprints with the car charge versus taking all the way back up to 100% every time. Again, I'll be stopping a little bit more often, but I didn't have to for this trip, so it was a lot better than I thought it would be, and I would 100% take the Tesla over my gas car for these trips. The charge time was completely negligible to me in impacting the quality of trip. The other thing that I did want to note too is that the initial charge estimate that you get when you start driving the car changes pretty drastically depending on road conditions, the weather, and how you're driving the vehicle. In almost every circumstance, I lost about 3 to 6% of the charge when you reach your destination value, which was fine for me because it'd be going from something like 18% at destination to 13% at destination. So I still had some margin, but it is something to note because if you plan your trip and it's saying 5% when you arrive at your supercharger, I would be a little bit nervous. I don't know if I would want to have that tight of a window if the conditions cause that to drop. Because in my circumstance where it was rainy, it was pretty cold, I tend to drive on the faster side, that total dropped pretty quickly. And I will say that the computer's fast enough that very early in my trip, it started adjusting it down to where I thought it would be and probably settled out when I was within 45 minutes of a destination. But if I was someplace where the chargers were more few and far between, I would definitely be looking to pull that in to give myself at least a 10% margin for arrival, just because you never know and you don't want to be in a position where you had 5% and all of a sudden it's hitting 0 and you got 3 miles to go. It's just something to be aware of, to give yourself some breathing room, because that's going to fluctuate based on your conditions when you embark on your trip. The final thing that's more of a note than anything else that I hadn't experienced, if you're doing heavy highway driving and you're using autopilot and FSD in poor conditions such as wet roads or heavy rain, it actually limits the amount you can exceed the speed limit down to not being able to exceed it at all if you're using either of those two features. And obviously that's a good thing for safety's sake, but if you happen to be like me and drive a lot in the left lane and you're using enhanced autopilot, which is what I was using, we don't have FSD anymore, it's just something that you're gonna have to consider with your travel, because you basically have to decide if I'm gonna stay in that left lane or use enhanced autopilot, because if I'm going exactly the speed limit, there's gonna be a lot of people riding in the left lane. So just something to be aware of if you're using one of those two features, that there are limitations based on weather and road conditions. But all in all, I have to say I was very impressed with the performance for this type of trip. It didn't add noticeable trip time, at least from my perspective, compared to a gas vehicle. I know the longer you drive, the more that would become apparent, but for this 420-ish mile trip, did not experience any of that there, and I would 100% take our Tesla for anything of this length, especially when we don't have to haul around a ton of luggage. And as always, the Tesla is an absolute pleasure to drive, so any opportunity I can get to drive that versus our other vehicles is something that I'm 100% gonna take. So another huge win in my opinion that this car is viable for these types of trips. But yeah, that's all I had today. If you do have any other experiences or think I missed something in the pros and cons of taking a Tesla on a road trip, definitely add that to the comments below. And as always, if you did like this content and you want to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time,